Now, as I've said before, Return of the Jedi always has been and always will be my favorite Star Wars movie, in large part because it's the first Star Wars movie I remember seeing. I can pretty vividly recall seeing it in the theater when I was 5 years old back in 1983, and it has just stuck with me ever since, as has a love for Star Wars in general. And thus, giving a truly objective, non-biased review of the film would be kinda difficult, but that is exactly what I'm going to try and do here in this video. I'm going to try and give a more critical review of it to try and assess what myself, and maybe others, maybe would think about it or say about it today if they'd just seen it for the first time. And this will be the first time I've seen the original version of the film since the special editions came out in 1997. I have only seen that version of Return of the Jedi for the last 27 years. Though, in all reality, there's not much difference between the two versions. The biggest one is probably the inclusion of Jedi Rocks, a whole little song and dance performance during the Jabba's Palace sequence. Then there's also things like the Ewok celebration at the end, where we now see some flashes to other parts of the galaxy or other planets and how they're celebrating the fall of the Empire. And Yub Nub, sang by the Ewoks, has been removed and replaced by a different celebration song entirely. One that, in my opinion, is a bit more subdued and lacks the energy of Yub Nub. But anyway, like I said, I tried to watch the movie as if I were kind of watching it for the first time, or maybe with some of the critiques I have heard about the movie in my mind over the many years it has been out now. Even though this is far and away the Star Wars movie I have watched the most. We're talking ballpark somewhere around maybe 100 times I've seen this movie over the years, and that is not an exaggeration. I mean, I pretty much watch all the films one time a year anyway, at the least. And then when you go back to when I was a kid, I watched Return of the Jedi maybe weekly. And so that adds up over time. And though, like I said, or as it should be obvious, I do have an unabashed love of this film, I know some out there don't. Some not only think it is by far the weakest of the original trilogy films, but there are even those out there who really don't like it at all or have some pretty major issues with it. And like I said, I was trying to watch it again with those issues in mind. And the first of those issues is the whole opening act, pretty much, or roughly the first third of the film, where our heroes save Han Solo, which, ironically enough, just might be my favorite Star Wars anything of all time. Or at least the Sarlacc pit battle is. I could not get enough of that when I was a kid, watching a Jedi truly do his thing. And yeah, I still love it today, even if I do or can now see some of the issues people have with this sequence or first act in general that I once all but ignored. One of which being you do spend a third of the movie on a rescue mission that really doesn't have much bearing on anything else in the film. Or at least that's what some will say. You could argue, and maybe this isn't exactly the most non-biased argument ever, but you could argue saving Han and later having him lead the mission to deactivate the shield generator on the forest moon of Endor was very critical, that under his leadership it was successful, and under the leadership of another it may not have been, it may have failed, and thus the whole mission fails and the fleet and, well, pretty much all their hope is destroyed. Not to mention then the Death Star is not destroyed. Though what's interesting about that is, more than likely, Vader still turns back to the light to save his son from Palpatine, and then of course dies from the lightning, meaning we have an interesting kind of what-if scenario where Palpatine and Vader are dead, but the Death Star is still intact, as is more or less the rest of the Empire. But anyway, setting that fun question aside for another time, or perhaps another video, an argument can be made that saving Han was the key to victory for the rebellion, though I don't know if roughly a third of the movie needed to be spent on it, and yes, an argument could be made that someone else could have led the attack and also been successful. However, how much time it takes from the film is not the only complaint I've heard about this part of the movie. There is also the fact that the plan to rescue Han maybe doesn't make a ton of sense either when you really stop and think about it or try to figure it out. I mean, Leia dressed as Bosch turns in Chewbacca to save Han or as part of the plan, and it's done to basically gain the trust of Jabba and to get on the inside, literally. But how did she plan to rescue Chewbacca now, or R2 and 3PO for that matter, which Luke sent in and gave to Jabba? Was she supposed to gather them all up on her way out that night, assuming Jabba didn't know the wiser and had a trap waiting for her, of course? Did they maybe not foresee that Jabba would use C-3PO as an interpreter and have him at his side pretty much all the time? And how would they know he was going to do that? How would they know Jabba didn't have an interpreter other than, yeah, Lando was on the inside and could have said something, though why would he think that would matter? But anyway, did they just think Jabba would take 3PO and R2 as gifts and just kind of not think twice about them, throw them into storage essentially, and then they'd help Chewbacca escape that night or help Leia somehow, or who knows what? Were they supposed to be part of the initial escape plan? Again, most likely to liberate Chewbacca. That's kind of the only way Luke giving them to Jabba really makes sense, that he thought, like most droids, Jabba and everyone else in the palace would basically overlook them, and they could help on the inside to get Chewbacca out, or get Leia out if she needed help too. And R2 could also sneak in a lightsaber should things go wrong and Luke need to come to the rescue. In other words, without going too much into all of this, I do want to talk about the whole film, but if you really want, you can kind of construe things to make sense, but as presented in the film, though it does work in the end, we have to remember that, it really does seem to not make sense, or it seems like they have the foresight to know when things are going to go wrong, or have backup plans within backup plans in order to eventually, as I said, win or rescue Han. Either way, I certainly think, though it pains me to say this because I do love that sequence, but you could consider it a bit of a strike against the film in general, that it is not as clear as maybe it could be or even should be. And another interesting what-if scenario could be, what if Han had been killed in The Empire Strikes Back and Harrison Ford did want his character to die? Or what if he had been rescued at the end of the film instead? Basically, what if Return of the Jedi didn't have to open with saving Han Solo? What might the beginning of the film be like instead? Again, I think that's a fun question for a future video. And even tying into that a bit, and maybe a part of that video, could be another really interesting question. What if the Empire didn't build a second Death Star? Because that is another big complaint I've always seen or heard about this movie. Why did it have to be another Death Star? And yeah, I can get that as a complaint, the redundancy of it, that you have to go and blow up another one. And it was utterly ridiculous that they went back to the well yet again in The Force Awakens and made an even bigger one, but let's not get into that here and now. But yeah, I do get it. Why another Death Star? Couldn't George Lucas and company come up with a different situation or location for the final battle to take place, or another big threat that the Empire had come up with that needed to be stopped or else? And would the Empire really even sink all the credits into building another Death Star after what happened to the first one? And well, I mean, yeah, I could actually see them making another one, given the first one just had a stupid, easily correctable flaw that got it blown up. And if we take Rogue One into consideration, it was a flaw that was purposely designed into it, so it is a pretty easy fix in theory. Plus now you have all the plans in place, you know it actually works, it did blow up Alderaan. So yeah, I could actually see them making another one. It is kind of the ultimate weapon, though if things like the Holdo maneuver works, I would never suggest making such a huge weapon when just a ship could be flown into it and destroy it. But it does make sense for them to make another one because very few, if any, planets are really going to risk getting out of line when they can literally be blown up. Not to mention, it can decimate a fleet of ships. We see that during the Battle of Endor when the Death Star becomes operational and starts to decimate the Rebel fleet. So I personally don't have an issue with the Empire building another Death Star. I honestly think they would as long as resources, manpower, and all that wasn't an issue. But I do get the complaint that it's the same damn thing again that we saw in the first film. Another complaint I hear about this movie, and it is probably the biggest complaint of them all, is the Ewoks. And well, I don't have an issue with them at all. Like I said at the start, I was 5 when this movie came out, so I love Ewoks, I do. I didn't have a problem with them as a kid. I don't really have a problem with them now. But at the same time, no, I'm not 5 anymore, so even though I don't have that issue, I can see how, if you weren't 5 at the time, you maybe did have an issue. You could maybe see them as a bit annoying, or think it's ridiculous that bows and arrows defeated the Empire, or defeated an entire legion of Palpatine's best troops. And so, yes, I can understand why some people don't like Ewoks, or why some even hate Ewoks. But I do like the point of putting them in the film, of Ewoks, a smaller, more primitive species with primitive technology, however you want to put it, being able to defeat the mightier machine, if you will. And it's also not like the Ewoks don't take any casualties. In fact, I appreciate that we do see an Ewok literally being killed, or one of them dies in the reaction of his friend. Another sort of complaint I sometimes see about this movie is the conversation between Luke and the Force ghost of Obi-Wan on Dagobah. There are those who take issue with Obi-Wan basically saying, "I just told you the truth about your father from a certain point of view." Which, I mean, he wasn't lying there. In a way, Vader did betray and murder his father. I honestly think it's about the best explanation you can come up with, considering, of course, the decision to make Vader Luke's father did not happen or didn't come about until The Empire Strikes Back, after Obi-Wan had said what he did to Luke about his father in A New Hope. And really here, I will gladly take what some may think is a lame excuse in order to get one of the greatest twists in the history of film. That, of course, being the reveal that Vader is Luke's father. Not to mention, doing it that way does a lot for the story, and does a lot for what that story amounts to in this film, in Return of the Jedi. That being the absolutely best and most brilliant ending I may have ever seen, where pretty much everything between Vader and Luke in the back half of the movie is exceptional. I don't think it is possible to come up with anything better than what we got, and it all really depends on Vader being Luke's father to make it work. I don't want to try to imagine what it would have been like any other way, or what if Vader hadn't been Luke's father, and then how the movie would then end. It would be next to impossible to have even a fraction of the emotional punch it does this way, with Vader being his father, and more than likely, Luke would have had to go in there and kill both Palpatine and Vader to have the happy ending, which, yeah, a fight between Luke and Vader and Palpatine sure could have been cool to see, I suppose, or definitely. But no spectacle could have ever been greater than Luke throwing away his lightsaber and proclaiming himself a Jedi like his father before him. And speaking of how amazing all that was, or not getting a spectacle there, even though, yeah, the fight between Luke and Vader is still fine, we certainly got one with the space battle portion of the Battle of Endor. I think it is still one of, if not the best looking space battles I have ever seen in a movie. It looks incredible to this very day, even the very original version I just rewatched. Not that there's a bunch of changes to the special edition version, though it has probably been cleaned up to some degree, but it looked fantastic in its original form, and there's just something about it that, in my opinion, with the use of practical effects, with the use of real ships, or models of ships, that looks better than anything I've ever seen done with CGI. And so, to wrap this up, I do get the problems people have with Return of the Jedi. I understand why some people think it is the weakest, or they don't even like it. And if it came out today in the Disney era, certainly it would have its critics that would just dissect the film and point all the things out wrong with it. I may even be one of them. And who knows how fans on the whole would really react to it. Who knows how fans would feel about things like Darth Vader so easily, they might argue, turning back to the light to save his son. There might even be people out there who hate the ending or find it ridiculous all around. We'll never know. But for me, even though, yeah, I was trying to rewatch it with a more critical eye, there was just pure joy watching the original version of this film. Yeah, all these years later, I can admit it's not a perfect movie. I never thought it was perfect, and I can see all the issues with it. But after all this time just loving it, they don't take anything away from it for me, and never will. Return of the Jedi always will be not only my favorite Star Wars movie, but my favorite movie of all time. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think of Return of the Jedi. Do you see the problems with it? Do they bug you? And do they bug you a lot? To the point where maybe you don't think it's a very good film? Or maybe you love it, maybe it is your favorite like it is mine. Whatever the case may be, though, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.